Henry Ford. I mean, the name itself is basically an institution, right? It's synonymous with the car, the assembly line, really the entire shape of the 20th century. He was, you could say, the architect of modern American industry. But here's the thing. He was also the architect of something much, much darker.
So we all think we know his story, the guy who revolutionized manufacturing. But that's not even half of it. It really makes you wonder, when you build an empire that big, what else gets built up right alongside it, in its shadow?
All right, let's get into it, starting with the thing he's most famous for. See, before Henry Ford came along, the automobile was basically a toy for the rich, just a plaything. But Ford, he had a completely different and pretty radical idea. His vision for the Model T was actually pretty simple. He wanted a universal car for, as he put it, the great multitude. It had to be efficient, it had to be reliable, and most importantly, it had to be affordable. This wasn't just about building a machine. It was about creating a whole new kind of freedom for the average person. Now, to pull this off, he needed a totally new way to build things. He got inspiration from all over, from breweries, even from the disassembly lines in Chicago's meatpacking plants. And from that, he created the moving assembly line. And wow, the speed of the change was just staggering. I mean, look at these numbers. In 1908, it took over 12 hours to build one car. Then, just a few years later, in 1914, it was down to 93 minutes. Just incredible. And all that efficiency? Well, it translated directly into savings for the customer. The price of a Model T, which started out at $825 back in 1908, dropped all the way down to this, just $260 by 1925. That is absolutely astonishing. Suddenly, the universal car wasn't a dream anymore. It was a reality. But every revolution comes with a cost. This amazing efficiency, it didn't just create a new way to build cars, it created a new kind of worker and a whole new kind of workplace. So you have to ask, what was the human price for all this mechanical perfection? And that brings us to this idea that would pretty much define the entire century, Fordism. It's a whole economic and social system, really, and it's built on a really simple but powerful idea. You pay workers high wages so they can turn around and buy the very products they're making. But see, the genius of the assembly line was also kind of its curse. Ford broke the whole process down into 84 separate little steps, so each worker was trained to do just one simple, repetitive task all day long, over and over. It was brutally effective, yeah, but it also turned these skilled craftsmen into, well, cogs in a huge impersonal machine. It was pretty dehumanizing. And Ford, he demanded absolute control. He was totally against labor unions. To make sure he got his way, he put this guy, Harry Bennett, in charge of something called the service department. Now, this wasn't about customer service. No. It was basically an internal security force, some called it a goon squad, that used fear, intimidation, and straight-up violence to crush any talk of unionizing. This all came to a head in 1937, with the infamous and incredibly violent Battle of the Overpass. And this need for control, it even seeped into what looked like his most progressive idea, the famous $5 a day wage. I mean, it was a brilliant business move, for sure. But, and this is a big but, it came with a major catch. So get this, in 1914, Ford shocked the world. He more than doubled the minimum wage for his workers to $5 a day. $5. It was a total masterstroke. Employee turnover, which had been a huge problem, just plummeted. The best mechanics in the country flocked to his factories. And just like that, he created a whole new class of consumers who could actually afford to buy the cars they were building. But here's the reality behind that promise. It wasn't just a simple raise. To actually get the full $5, workers had to subject themselves to Ford's sociological department. And yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like. Inspectors would actually show up at employees' homes to make sure they were living properly. No heavy drinking, no gambling, not even having too much debt. So this amazing economic freedom was tied directly to a pretty serious invasion of privacy. Now, Ford's obsession with engineering society, it didn't stop at the factory doors. He was about to take those same principles of mass production and apply them not to cars, but to manufacturing and distributing a truly poisonous ideology across the entire globe. To put it plainly, Henry Ford used the full power of his industrial empire not just to build cars, but to mass produce and systematically spread anti-Semitic hate on an industrial scale.
His main weapon for this was a newspaper he owned called the Dearborn Independent. From 1920 to 1927, this paper published a 91-part series titled The International Jew. Now, this was based on a completely fraudulent document, the infamous Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And how did he distribute it? He used his own business. He literally required every single Ford dealership to hand out the paper. This wasn't just some local thing. This was a machine for pumping propaganda into every corner of the country and, eventually, the world. And the impact of this, well, it wasn't lost on the rising Nazi party over in Germany. This wasn't some subtle connection either. Adolf Hitler himself told a reporter from the Detroit News in 1931 that he considered Henry Ford his inspiration. He even kept a portrait of Ford in his office. And the consequences of this propaganda were horrifyingly real. You just have to look at the Nuremberg trials after World War II. Baldur von Schirach, the convicted leader of the Hitler Youth, testified that the decisive anti-Semitic book he read was Henry Ford's The International Jew. He said, "I read it and became anti-Semitic." I mean, it's just chilling. So, where does that leave us? We're left with this massive, deeply troubling contradiction, right? The very same man who built so much of our modern world was also a key architect of its absolute darkest impulses. When you look at his legacy, it's like two different people. On one hand, you have the architect, the guy who revolutionized manufacturing, who literally put a nation on wheels, who created the economic system of Fordism that shaped the American century. But on the other hand, you have the arsonist, the man who used his corporate power to mass produce and export anti-Semitic hate, who inspired and was praised by the leaders of Nazi Germany, and who left behind propaganda that sadly is still used by hate groups today. And that leads us to the final, really unavoidable question. How do we remember a man who built our modern world and also fueled one of its darkest chapters? This isn't just dusty old history. It's a part of the world we're all still living in. So how do we grapple with this man's legacy, the architect and the arsonist, all rolled into one? That's the complicated inheritance he left for all of us to figure out.